This podcast contains explicit language.
Bafangu!
This episode of Dorking Out is brought to you by
Offline games. Like video games, but think they're too loud, expensive, and you're tired of spending so much time in front of a screen? Try offline games. They're video games that you can play on your kitchen table. Each game comes with a handy board and either cards or dice, or sometimes both. And when you're finished playing, offline games can be easily stored in our patented offline game receptacle. Order your offline game today using the code WINNER and save 20%.
Houston, flight is go.
Mila, let's go. SPM. Safety contact.
From Assignment X, thesoniashow.com, and Amalgamated Storytelling, this is The Dorking Out Show, the podcast for people who love stories from movies, TV, books, podcasts, and everywhere else.
Welcome to episode 89 of Dorking Out, our weekly status check on Star Trek Discovery. This is the Wolf Inside edition. That is because we will be talking about and spoiling the heck out of Star Trek Discovery Episode 11, The Wolf Inside. Returning today to talk with us is Jeff Bond, the author of many books, including Star Trek, or the music of Star Trek, the art of Star Trek, the Kelvin Timeline, as well as a book on Seth McFarland's The Orville. Also with us is Alexandra August, huge Star Trek fan, writer for Geek Magazine, as well as my favorite Game of Thrones podcast, Got Thrones, and the new DiscoTrek. Sonia is a little bit behind in her Star Trekking, so she will be discussing Discovery at some future point. Last night, Burnham and crew we're still stuck in the Mirror Universe. Michael is captain of the Sinju and gets orders to destroy the rebellion against the Terran Empire. She finds out it's a Federation-like collection of Tellarites, Andorians, Vulcans, and Klingons, with one particular Klingon leading the charge. That leads to her trying to thread the needle between being a good officer of the Empire and accomplishing her mission to get Discovery and its crew back to the correct universe. Alex, it looks like a lot of your theories all along have been confirmed last night in the episode. Ash is Vok. There are even more hints that Captain Lorca, that we know, is actually from the Mirror Universe. The Emperor is Giorgio. Is there anything else about the rest of the entire season that you would like to tell us? How's it going to end? You were right about nearly everything.
Everyone just needs to listen to me more. Like, just say this to say what you just said to like every time I go on an interview for a job. You should just come along, and
I'll do it. She's great. You should hire her, but she's got to be. You got to let her be on my podcast, but hire her. That kind of thing.
Explain that I can tell the future. I was elated when Giorgio showed up, and it just made so much sense. And it's been because I was rewatching Despite Yourself last night, and while on the one hand Burnham is so disturbed by seeing Connor and seeing her bridge crew and being on the Shenzhou again, I also realized, I was like, wow, she actually must be a little bit pleased because she's getting to sort of relive her life as though she hadn't been this massive traitor, or that she hadn't been this massive turncoat, essentially. And last night watching the episode, it was just kind of like, you get that sense from her that part of her is a little bit liking this, that she's getting a do-over, even though it's like the world's worst do-over and everyone's terrible, but she's getting to relive the biggest mistake of her life and having not made that mistake.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Jeff, how do you feel about one of the longest running theories that we've all been talking about, one that I've vacillated back and forth about, been excited about and then very not excited about, and then now somewhere in the middle? Ash was Vok the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, I've been, to me, it's been so strong out, and I was listening to another sort of well-known Trek authority who I will not name, but he was kind of complaining about how telegraphed this whole thing has been, and I was thinking. I was thinking at the time that I was thinking at the time though that I mean everyone reacts to these things differently, and I know when I watch some movies I can identify the killer or be 20 jumps ahead of the plot, and then other movies, not necessarily better or worse movies, just a different movie, I can be completely out of the loop and have no idea what's going to happen. And honestly, at least for the first, the thing is that people were theorizing this. I think like IO9 was basically saying this was obvious from the moment you picked up Tyler.
Right, and she's your fan.
Leaves in the first Mud episode, from the Klingon prison station, that it's obvious that he's a turncoat, and that people are already, because it's the same actor playing, people knew that this actor was playing Voq, and
no, but Javinik Bal is an actual real actor. Yeah. So if I had not been on social media, I certainly would not have been thinking about it. This at that point, once you started seeing all his little PST flashbacks, it certainly started laying the groundwork, and I would say that there's definitely an argument to be made that it was drawn out so long and we got so many hints about it that it was robbed of some of its impact by the time it actually happened. But I do like the fact that it happens in the mirror universe, and this has to be the most unique approach to having someone deal with their mirror universe counterpart in all of Star Trek. That was really I would not say the way that it was executed was particularly brilliant. Like my biggest sort of criticisms about this episode are about the whole sequence on the planet with the rebellion group against the Empire. I felt like, just from a production value standpoint, that
well, it looks like we're having a little bit of technical difficulties. So Jeff has dropped out temporarily, we hope, in the midst of talking about the not so fantastic production values of the Rebellion planet, which I have to agree, what is it about Star Trek and almost all science fiction shows where they have some grungy, beaten up, weathered rebellion situation. Southern California rebellion situation. They all look like this. They're dirty, but they're not too dirty. Things are banged up, but they're not too banged up. There's usually like a bunch of beaten up golf carts and, spray painted black corrugated metal, and then a bunch of guns. So, but what did you think of the episode?
I was pretty okay. So I don't know. I'm really trying very hard to be good at being a critic when it comes to Star Trek Discovery, but it's really hard when they do stuff like give Sarek a beard or give Sarek a beard. They gave him a goatee, and I don't know, listeners, if you are aware, but like the original Mirror Universe episode, Mirror Mirror, spawned the bad guys wear goatees trope for television. And so when you see, Mirror Universe Spock has a goatee to the point, and it's a prominent goatee, and to the point where his captain James Kirk the other Kirk, when Kirk is aboard the Enterprise, starts screaming like, "Spock, who is this? What's going on? Where's your beard?" Like, they make a huge point of the fact that like the evil Spock has a beard and regular Spock doesn't, and so the fact that they gave Sarek a goatee and made him this prophet and had Voq lead them was just really, I don't know. It was ticked a lot of boxes off of my list. I will say at the end of the day, I don't know that I kind of telegraphed the Vogue thing. My co-host Johnny Kolazinski on DiscoTrek did it well before I did. But I didn't feel like it was dragged out. I kind of saw it. We all saw it coming, but it didn't feel like at any point in time they could have revealed that earlier. And I really enjoyed watching Tyler create this relationship with Burnham. It was really unsettling and weird and disturbing,
right?
And good. Like I kind of liked that. So the fact that it was revealed this episode I wasn't sitting there tapping my foot waiting for it. I've been more tapping my foot for Michelle Yeoh to reappear and for Lorca's intentions to be revealed. So
Jeff, when we last talked to Jeff, we were before the technical difficulties. He was talking about the not so fantastic production value of the Planet X, the Rebellion planet. Alex and I had a quick comment while he was away about how all Star Trek shows, almost all the time when they have some sort of rebellion, have some planet like this where things are beaten up, scuffy. They all kind of look the same. For some reason, they have fans. Something about rebellions needs lots of huge, big, cool-looking fans with lights shining through them. But
the
Jeff,
fans were prominent. The fans were like the unsung hero of this episode, I will say.
That's right. If I have to see another documentary about the Maquis using fans in World War II, I'll tell you. All right, sorry. Anyway, Jeff, what else were you thinking about when it came to that planet and the proto?
Well, the fact that they had the dune buggy outside the
that's right,
gave me a bad flashback to Star Trek Nemesis.
I think no, don't you mean
yeah?
Oh, go ahead.
Insurrection.
Yeah, or is it?
I think it was Nemesis. But in your defense, Alex, it feels very Insurrection.
Yeah, it does feel.
I remain the only fan of Insurrection and Nemesis. But go on. I did, but yeah, I thought that was interesting. I like having Sarek be the the goateed prophet was a cool touch. I think that it wasn't disastrous, the stuff on the planet, but I think the kind of level that they'd set with in terms of makeup wasn't quite matched. And I think the show overall, we have the number one in the Mirror universe is this redheaded officer from the Shinju, who's got a kind of a cybernetic attachment on the Discovery, but we never get it. I think this is the first time. I guess she's spoken before, but she's got a lot more to do in this episode, and it's similar to what I was talking about last week, where the show is, to me, one of the biggest flaws of the show, and I keep hearing that this may be Akiva Goldsman's issue, is that you don't have a lot of little moments of characterization for the secondary, the lower tier characters. And even though you see them every week, they hire these actors to flesh out the background of the Discovery, and you sort of get to recognize them, but they're not, like I said last time, they're not like Mr. Sulu, where you feel like, okay, the guy doesn't have tremendous depth. You might really not know very much about him, but the just the personality and the guy's performance and their presence seems much more like a character, right, than what you get out of some of these other people. And been an ensemble piece, the way we're used to seeing Star Trek.
Yeah, and this same thing with when you saw an alien, really on any of the earlier shows, they were able to establish a very full-fleshed out performance in a very little amount of time. Look at, like Journey to Babel, the Tellurite in Journey to Babel registered as a very strong character that with just a few seconds of conversation. And I felt they missed that. I couldn't tell you what the Andorian has to do with anything other than holding a gun.
Agreed.
Yeah,
in this
that's a
story.
lot of makeup.
So
that's a lot of makeup for a character.
to have, why not let these
chair.
people register a little bit more as characters? That's been a big failing of the show. But other than that, it certainly seems like this show is moving in a direction that's much more satisfying, for fans. That's getting into the Star Trek mythology and the themes of the show. And I really like the opening montage of Burnham just kind of existing on this ship, getting her morning ablutions done by Saru, and
that really felt like Game of Thrones, the very first episode. Winter is coming, and we're introduced to Daenerys, and she takes a bath after Viserys goes in and kind of tells her that she's going to be offered to Khal Drogo.
Mm-hmm.
That immediately when Burnham was getting a bath and getting massaged by Saru, all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, that's it was very much like that introduction.
Right.
Yeah. Another thing I noticed, just a little thing, is that the spaceship shots were much more leisurely and kind of took more time giving you a kind of a rich image that you could enjoy. I mean, if you enjoy watching people getting spaced, but there's a couple of beautiful shots of the ships. That's something that's kind of, as a Trekkie, that's been a weird aspect of this show, is that they put tons of money in it, but the spaceship shots are always just very, very tiny, brief shots. So
I agree. Well, especially when you consider the opening credits of Star Trek: The Next Generation and how many gorgeous images you got of the Enterprise D. The Enterprise D was sort of the unsung hero of that show. I remember not watching Generations for years because they destroyed the Enterprise D, and it was painful to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That
it's a lot about the ship for fans. That that was even the original show. There were always kind of this line that the real star of the show is the Enterprise. And that we sort of haven't, for all the kind of care and even controversy, and people were talking about the design of the Discovery for almost a year before the show went on the air, but we don't get the kind of loving looks at the ship, and we get a little bit more of that, although mostly for the Shinzu in this episode. But yeah, I like the reveal and the use to it. There's some great complications and levels that they've managed to build into the story, even though the whole Vogue thing has been very predictable. And I think up to the last minute, people were wondering if they were going to do some kind of left turn, because so many people were predicted that this is what was going to happen.
Yeah.
But I like the fact that they dealt with this idea of kind of betrayal and the complexity of the whole relationship between him and Burnham and the situation. And I thought it was a great little twist of her, given the opportunity to execute him, and, using that as the way to get the information back to the Discovery. Although I have to say it's really a cheat in terms of the staging of that, where she punches him. I don't think she could have actually got the disc into his, holster in that move. But it was a nice surprise. So I like the way this played out, and I love, I was very much hoping that the Michelle Yeoh was going to be the Emperor, and obviously that is the case, and that sets up just a great possible finale for this, assuming it's a 3-episode arc. And I'm also really interested in that we got some kind of look at it, although it certainly doesn't look like this is that she's on the Defiant. She's on some giant like throne room ship, which is a cool idea, and I'm interested in seeing what that's going to be.
Maybe her own sarcophagus ship.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. But I want to, I think, from a purely like fan-oriented perspective, I really want to see the Defiant. I want to see more than a wireframe, cheesy wireframe view of that. And I think that they made so much of it that it's really going to be disappointing if they don't wind up showing that and how that's been kind of used. This definitely was interesting. I'll tell you, sort of slightly off topic. I bought the Amazon channel extension that you can use to watch this show through Amazon, and it was, to pay an extra $10 on top of your Amazon Prime.
Right, the CBS.
And I watched two episodes. This might just be me, but my experience with Amazon streaming has been uniformly awful. And I watched, I think I watched the entire episode last night, actually 1.5 times. And I don't think it ever got to true, like, high definition. It looked absolutely horrendous throughout. And I wound up having to rewatch the whole thing through CBS, which I had no problems with and looked gorgeous. So take that for what you...
Yeah, which is interesting because usually I find Amazon pretty good. And I have had problems, not problems like a lot of problems I've heard reported with CBS, but CBS has been a little glitchy here and there.
Yeah, I definitely had problems with them early, and I wonder if by the time I watched it, it was not, it was past peak viewing. It was 3 or 4 hours after the episode had gone live, and I don't know how that really affects it. But for me, Amazon almost always, it's like at least the opening 5 minutes that you're going to watch is very degraded, and then it eventually settles into a nice look. But it just sort of never got there.
Let me ask you this real quick, and then we are going to be back to discussing the subject of Star Trek Discovery. I promise, audience. How do you listen, or how do you watch? Do you use like an Apple TV or like a Roku, or what's your method usually?
For CBS, I have an Apple TV, and the reason that I got the Amazon subscription is that we have a second TV in the bedroom, which is just a TV, and I could not watch it there. And my son tends to hog the television. So I usually would have to wait for them to go to bed to watch it. And I was like, this time I was like, I can just go into the bedroom and watch this. And so, but it seems like it may not be working out.
So, all right, back to now that we've troubleshot Jeff's Skype and Apple TV. Back to Star Trek Discovery. Let me ask you this, because I'm thinking about this. Like, part of me, I'm kind of with you, Jeff. Like, part of me got really kind of little excited in a nerd way about little details from last night, and is she going to be on the Defiant, and what's going to happen here, and all these kind of things coming up, and he looks like Vok is Ash's Vok. And then, so I'm looking at Star Trek Discovery, stepping back, is we have a lot more kind of, I don't want to say fan servicey, but little fan details that we've come to understand are exactly the kind of details that Star Trek fans seem to love. They praise shows the most that feed them these little bits of minutia about the universe and about characters and all that kind of stuff, tying in with the larger Star Trek universe, almost in a very Marvel Cinematic Universe kind of way. If, the more you feed the audience things like this, the happier they are. And then we have...
I, literally cheered when I saw Sarek's beard last week. Was just...
Well, someone had also put up a meme that showed Saru with a beard. And I think and in fact, there was some other kind of fake, showing other characters that we have not seen yet. And after, seeing that, obviously you're not going to see Saru in a beard. I don't know that any of these things are anything but fake, but it was interesting because I try to avoid seeing the stuff online before I watched the episodes, but I'd already sort of thought, oh, okay, we're going to see Saru as an evil, creature with
Jeff
a beard
was
in
fucking
this.
useless to me when I was trying to write about this episode for the Mirror Universe. Like, Jeff and I got spoiled that it was going to be in the Mirror Universe, and so I pitched Comic Book Resources a bunch of articles about like the fact that I was in the Mirror Universe, and just was like, okay, we can write about this and this and this and this and this. And then my editor was like, cool. So, he's like, cool. So I'm down with you for that it's the Mirror Universe, but will it be revealed that episode? And I was like, oh shoot, I don't have that confirmed. And so I asked Jeff, and Jeff was like, no, I don't. I've been steering clear of all that intelligence stuff.
Well,
I'm trying to enjoy the show.
Exactly. So speaking of enjoy the show,
to me, go ahead.
Let me ask you this, because so part of it is there's this thread of fan service that we seem to be getting more of, and part of it is, Jeff, I think what you talked about, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years before the show even came on, which is modern techniques and modern look, modern storytelling techniques, serialized. Right. And that's what we're getting. We have this thread of Vok running. We have this kind of twisty, turny, who has what agenda kind of storytelling on Discovery. Now we're having this extended multi-episode arc in the Mirror Universe, which, for all of our discussion about how Discovery is breaking new ground and doing new things, Enterprise did this 10 years ago, 15 years ago. How are we feeling about the show in general? Like, what are all of these pieces adding up to when it comes to a Star Trek show? Is this kind of what you were hoping for? Is this going in the direction that you wanted? How is this, stepping back, how is this as a satisfying Star Trek experience for you?
I read a really interesting article. I want to say it was maybe from like Sci-Fi Wire or something, that was somebody talking about how they didn't understand what Discovery was, and that was a good thing. And they were talking about how when Next Generation came out, that fans were up in arms and were really frustrated. And they were like, the person who wrote it was like, I was a massive Star Trek The Next Generation fan, and I now have an appreciation for how frustrated and how, betrayed a lot of fans felt when this show emerged and it wasn't the original series and it wasn't what they were used to and it wasn't what they were excited about. And I typically I'm not a contentious fan in general. I want to like stuff, so I give the stuff that I like a lot of room. So I was never I tried not to have a lot of expectations around Discovery because I didn't want to be disappointed. Right. And it annoys the living crap out of me when Star Trek fans are kind of perennially disappointed by whatever iteration the franchise comes up with next.
Yes.
And it's just tiresome after a while. Like I understand there are things that I don't like about the Abrams first, and there are things that I didn't like about Voyager when it came out and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it is Star Trek, and it is like, it's what we have. And so if you want more of the show, I don't see a lot of use in, sort of pouting and stamping your foot at that it's not what you think it should look like. So that's kind of the attitude I tried to have with Discovery, which was just, okay, well, I don't know what to expect from this, and it's probably not going to look like what I want it to look like, but it's Star Trek, it's new Star Trek, it's on television, and it's prestige television, or at least it's trying to be, which I think is more ambitious than any Star Trek show has done before. So for me, I would say I've really, really, really enjoyed it. That said, I'm kind of in the camp of people who are like, is it really, really Star Trek in the way that we've known it to be? Is it really, does it have that core of optimism, that idealism? It seems much more dystopic than we're used to from Star Trek. And I'm kind of reserving judgment until the season finishes to decide whether or not I think that's ultimately something that hamstrings it and stops it from being. And I'm trying to see if what makes Star Trek essentially Star Trek is missing from the show. I don't have an answer for that yet, and I hope it's not a no, that like this show eventually will come around and make me see that, yeah, okay, this is just a different way of telling the same story. I can't. I've realized as I'm watching it that you can't really make that call until the season is finished and until
which
this
I
particular
think,
story is told.
in your defense, I think I ask some form of this question every episode that we have this discussion, and every episode you guys give the reasonable, logical, meaningful answer of, well, we're going to wait till the end of the season, Chris. Stop asking. No. Let me reframe it a little bit to you, Jeff. I think one of the things that for me is essential with Star Trek and maybe this is the thing that's keeping me from 100% locking in with the show. And now that I'm thinking about the interviews with Brian Fuller and several of the creators before this show got started, which is Star Trek is about optimism. We need optimism right now. Star Trek Discovery is going to be about optimism. And that might be the one thing that I'm having a really hard time seeing in this show right now. What do you think?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, first of all, I like that idea Alex read about that, which is that, we don't. What is this show? And I think that's something that I was kind of voicing very early on is how are we going to combine the kind of tropes of Star Trek, which is what fans want, with the idea of a contemporary television show, which is done very differently. And so it was never clear what that was. It was, if I knew what that was, I could just go out and create a new, contemporary Star Trek show. That's great. And that's a success. Clearly this show has been and probably will be an ongoing experiment in how this works. How do you take, aliens with antennas on their foreheads and pointed ears and things that were invented 50 years ago, and make them read to a modern audience and tell a story that's very interconnected and serialized the way we're used to seeing now. And I think that there's definitely a level at which this show has been kind of seemed to be groping through the darkness, figuring out how to do that. At sometimes successfully, sometimes not. But I do feel, in terms of the whole idea of optimism, I think that there's been a core idea here from the beginning, and it's still possible that it's not going to be pulled off. But I think it's obvious to me that the whole idea is, yes, Star Trek is about optimism, but we don't just start with, hey, everything's great. So we solved all the problems.
Like when people are leveled that criticism at this show, I'm like, well, yeah, I'm with you. Like every time somebody's like, oh, it's not, it's way too dark. I'm like, but it wasn't like heaven. It wasn't it wasn't utopia.
If there's nothing to overcome, what's the value of optimism and hope? This show, I think, is about, being confronted with, the darkest era, maybe that we've looked at in this kind of like history of the future, and finding out how like the ideals of Star Trek let these characters travel through this period and hopefully come out of it and solve some of its problems. And obviously, they've said from the beginning that this is going to be like in everything from the look of things and the technology to I think the kind of behavior and philosophy. It's going to be a journey from where this show is now to, how things are going to be when Kirk is on the Enterprise. And I don't think they're going to get there visually because they can't 100%, but I think they're going to give us Easter eggs and show us that that's sort of how this thing is moving. So I remember think
too that Discovery never happened, like up until this point, and the showrunners have been very clear about this. Like Discovery, according to Star Trek canon, never happened. It didn't exist. Spock didn't have a sister. There wasn't this ship. There is no spore drive. There's no record of it. So, and the writers have been very clear about the fact that will all be explained. And as I say that, I'm like worried that they're not going to do that, and I'm going to sound like an asshole for believing them. But
actually, no. That reminds me. And now that I'm thinking about it, I hope they don't do this. But Jeff, one of the things that I loved about your criticism 15 years ago when you were talking about a previous Star Trek entry is the Star Trek reset button, which was the dramatic situation where you could do whatever you wanted, but at the end of the episode, the Star Trek reset button had to get pressed so everything would go back to the way that we all knew it, and the next episode could go on as expected with the same regulars. I don't know if it was just something in the way that you said that, Alex, but I'm almost worried that they have some sort of Star Trek reset button at the end of this series. And it's going to be wiped out somehow.
I feel like that there's some reason that the whole Discovery technology and everything is buried, that it's a horrific failure. I don't feel like that the existence of these characters is necessarily going to be wiped out, and I think that would be. I don't know how you end the show without just creating a mass protest and and they just there's just a show that just did this I think X-Files, where they erased the last 4 or 5 episodes of the previous whatever quote unquote season of the new shows, and that there's a history of shows doing this, back to Dallas and stuff, where it was all a dream.
Elsewhere.
They wiped out a whole season.
Do not see Discovery doing that.
I agree with you. I think it's going to be more. I think it's going to be.
There's going to be reasons why we didn't hear about this. But it's not going to be that none of this ever happened.
I'm laughing because now I don't have to watch all the X-Files that have piled up.
Yeah, well, there are other reasons not to do that. Just don't watch anything written by Chris Carter, who I warned when they said we're bringing bringing X-Files back. I was like, wouldn't it be a great idea to do this without Chris Carter? And right.
I'm with you. All right, Alex, I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
What was I saying?
No, I'm sorry. I blew it. All right. Well, let me.
What I was saying was that I think Burnham is sort of the character here that can't really exist. I think she's the really problematic one because they've gone so far to make her Spock's sister and Sarek's foster daughter, and we just know. And these are characters these are Star Trek defining characters that you can't really retcon. So I feel like Burnham's existence might be in question, but I don't have a problem with there being a Discovery and there being a spore drive that we've never heard about, because it went so poorly that Starfleet was like, yeah, never mind. Shh. That I'm fine with. What I will have a really hard time with is if Burnham remains Burnham and they just expect us to believe that there was this whole other Spock family member that we've never heard about.
But there's already been a whole other. And Cybok is
universally hated.
It is. But he's also Cybok is a real blood relative of Spock. That's a lot harder to ignore than someone who's basically adopted.
Agree, but it was bad. I don't want that.
Yeah, I agree, but it makes sense that it makes far more sense that Sarek would never talk about Burnham around other Vulcans and around around Starfleet personnel than it does, Sybok, who was actually a real son of his.
Yeah, we do have precedents for Spock.
Though I feel like Spock and Burnham would have got along really well, and I kind of want to see her show up in Trouble with Tribbles or something like that. I feel like they would have been buddies.
Maybe, but I think we do have a lot of precedents for Spock
has his whole Spock has his whole. He's alienated from his father, through a lot of Star Trek. We don't really know what the dynamics of that
keeps his brother secret for 50 years.
And actually, the whole kind of twist about how she got where she was is really integral to the conflict between Spock and Sarek. So I think there's a lot of that just makes it is a glaring thing because it is something that's introduced way after the fact but this is also happened throughout the history of Star Trek. Nobody ever talked about the Cardassians in the original series, and as the show has gone on, they've invented the countless things where you can go back and say, well, wait, why didn't they mention that? How come nobody ever talked about this?
They weren't main characters. They weren't a character that's leading a show, and it wasn't about Spock.
Yeah.
I'm for the Cardassians not appearing until the Next Generation. It still is bothersome to me, the idea that we're going to, and I also just don't think that the writers are going to do that. I think they're going to figure out a way that they're going to erase Burnham in some capacity.
I think that,
I just don't buy that for the lead character of an entire Star Trek show to be erased from history. I mean, maybe they will do it, but that to me,
that would be.
I mean, let's say it would have to be
explosion.
done. I'll tell you how it would have to be done is for her to, make the decision to do it herself to save the Federation. Yeah, the Federation. I could see that, and that because you would have to do it that way. It would have to be some sacrifice for the greater good.
Well, and the idea that the show is about discovery and it's about self-discovery as much as it's about discovery of new things in space. I think that it would be incredibly poetic to have her go through this journey of self-identification and self-discovery only to at some point realize that in order to save and maintain the thing that she's always been incredibly committed to, which is the Federation and is Starfleet, would be to erase herself and would be to sort of it always reminds me of what Hermione does at the beginning of the Deathly Hallows. She erases herself from her parents' memory and she makes them forget. She obliviates her parents about her existence. And at no point is that rectified. That's forever. And
I mean, the only other thing I would say about that, though, is that I think that one of the sort of whole problems I think fans have had with this in regards to, the optimism of Star Trek is that Burnham out of the gate is such a suffering character. And, look at what's happened to her in this first season. It is all about her, kind of martyrdom. So I think in a way, what you kind of want and maybe what fans kind of want if they're going to be presented with this situation is to see this character, character journey from the absolute pit of despair to where she's finally, found peace and maybe found command and a place in Starfleet where she's happy. And, obviously, I think we can assume the show is going to run between 4 and 7 years. So there's much more that's going to happen to this character. But we have started off with it all being about her basically being, in this torturous situation, emotionally and psychologically. The whole show has been about putting her in the worst conceivable situation. So
she's had a bad year,
to end that way, to end the whole show.
Maybe that's what I'm reacting to.
A bummer.
Yeah. So, all right.
Well, I will say though, I have faith in this. I got a lot of flack for this online because it's hard to deny that I'm a fan of the show, and I really have a lot of faith in the writers just because of the lip service they've paid to canon. And I've taken a lot of flack for that. But I still have this faith because I think that these people really do love Star Trek, and I think they really, really, really have the right idea about what Star Trek is, and they have a respect for the meaning it can carry and how long it's lived because of that meaning. And so when they're like, yeah, we're going to explain it all, we realize that it's a really fucking big red flag that like nobody ever mentioned Michael Burnham. But we will explain this for you. It will make sense at some point. And while it seems fairly naive to say like, okay, yeah, I totally trust you, I really do. Like, these guys Gretchen Berg and Aaron Harbarts have really done an amazing job of carrying what makes Star Trek into a television landscape that it has never seen before. Like, this is where they're boldly going here. Like, Star Trek has never had to answer to Battlestar Galactica. It's never had to answer to HBO. And they're doing it, and it's working right now. And that's why I have this kind of faith in them and their abilities, because it seems like they're paying that homage, and they're capable of making something, of rejuvenating this franchise and allowing it to exist beyond the past 50 years.
Wow. I think that is a fantastic place to leave this discussion. Jeff, Alex, thank you so much. I'm very optimistic and hopeful for the future now. I would also just like to add that the next episode of Dorking Out is going to be a deep dive discussion about Star Trek Voyager with Alex, because boy does she love that show, but she sees it with a clear eye. So that's coming in a couple of days. Get excited about it. Boy,
is she a little crabby about certain things that happen.
Jeff, thank you for joining us. Is there anything else that you guys would like to say before we say goodbye?
Negative.
Nope, I'm good.
Bye!
The Dorking Out Show is on Twitter at Dorking Out Show, where you can also find me at Jet Juergens and Sonia at The Sonia Show.
And you can read all about my random adventures at my blog, thesoniashow.com, and track the slow, creeping process of Chris's novel and his other hijinks at jetjuergens.com.
Yeah, you know what? Go right over there right now and see how much is going on jetjuergens.com. Anyway, it'll be fun. It'll be like a trip back to 2016. Anyway, you can find out more about the Dorking Out Show at dorkingoutshow.com, and while you're over there, you can support us by giving us a review on Apple Podcasts. Please, for the love of God, for some reason, Apple Podcasts holds our destiny in their hands, so go over there and give us a rating, please. Sorry.
We would do it for you. We have a handy link on our website. It'll whisk you right over there so you can gush your love all over us.
This is disgusting.
It's disgusting.
Why did you write it like
I think
this, Sonia?
you
I
wrote
didn't
it like
write
that.
it like this. I don't like this.
We would gush love all over you and your podcast.
Yeah, we would do that. Anyway, point
Gushing.
is, I think we might be re-recording this here in a moment.
Gushing.
Jesus. What kind of podcast are you turning this into?
One that people will listen to.
This has been a presentation of Rocket Spots Media.